but everything would be very orally transmitted because we didn't have any way of communicating any written or documentation. Google wasn't even around, if you can believe that. So the idea was is that if I'm going from team to team, I'm sharing the oral history of the project. That's what we want to do. That's what we want to continue to do. We want to try to keep all the groups, not necessarily culturally the same, but at least by the way of the project, we want to keep it consistent. So one of the troubles that I see very frequently in distributed teams is that you've got such a cultural difference between Team A and Team B that Team A likes to work in the mornings, maybe 6 hours, and then go surfing in the afternoon, and Team B feels that they are obligated to work as hard as they can to meet the expectation, and there is no time for surfing. Plus, we're in the mountains, so we don't have surf. But basically, it's we work hard to make it so that they can go surf. You've got a big cultural disparity.
And also an interesting comment about what you first said about how we struggle first with this word. I'm not sure if you heard about it. The most common word for itinerants that is used on Agile is the word ambassador. Have you ever heard about it? Yeah? Well, we thought about it, I would say, it doesn't sound very right, ambassador. It's a word that I think was coined by Martin Fowler, or at least he popularized it in one of his papers. And we thought, why ambassador doesn't sound good? And I think we thought, well, let's think, for example, what about the United States ambassador here in Argentina? What do you cares about?
No politics.
No politics? Why not? Let's make it fun. The market's just cracked here in Argentina. What do you think U.S. ambassador thinks about? He was really sad. Did he cares about it? Which interest does the American ambassador cares about? Argentinian interests?
The American interest.
American business. He doesn't give a damn shit about Argentina, except because he's living here and maybe, well, he's scared about it in such that way. But ambassadors only go to some other place to care about the interest of their original places. They're not going there to collaborate, to build a relation. Well, maybe some of them, yes, but generally, they do not go there to build a trust and a long-term relationship and to create some profitable for all the teams which are around the world. That's why we didn't want to use the word ambassadors and short story.
Because basically what ends up happening with the concept of the ambassador is if I send one of my ambassadors to my team in Argentina, what they're going to do is essentially bring the information back to us rather than disseminate culture. So there's another concept called goodwill ambassador, which tends to be a non-governmental employee that goes out to various different countries, and what they try to do is increase awareness or interest or something like that. So we have movie stars that we send out frequently as goodwill ambassadors because our government doesn't quite do that for us. So, but getting away from that, the connotation on with the word ambassador just wasn't where we wanted it, so we chose a different word. Communication patterns comes back to what we were talking about with these eddy patterns and how communications work in groups. We need to make sure that we come up with a way in distributed Agile that we have a practice to communicate amongst people. The most common one used these days for anybody in multiple locations is I am.
Messenger.
Exactly.
There's something interesting about Messenger, at least in my own experience. What would you say is instant messaging a good tool to communicate with other people? If you have to pick face-to-face communication over the phone, it's not as good, you think? So you think face-to-face communication is much better? Have you ever talked face-to-face, for example, with a Scottish guy? No? I dare you to do that. I'd like to see you there, and you'll be just saying, give me a messenger at Yahoo or something like that, or Scotch or something like that, because, yeah, it's not, sorry, yeah.
You just drink a couple of scotch and you will be at the same level.
You got something, not just a couple.
Yeah, although English seems to be around the world pretty much.
Especially if he uses skirts.
That's
Wearing skirts.
Yeah.
Scotch whiskies.
You tend to focus on the wrong thing. What I found in traveling around a lot of Europe and the Far East and the Americas these days is that English has become the lowest common denominator. It's become the language of business, at least in the IT arena. And so everybody feels that they're able to communicate in English. We go back to that as the common language. But what ends up happening is either through dialect of how we've learned it, or through accent, or maybe the level to which our knowledge of English is, it is often easier to write the communication than it is to speak it.
And maybe if you get a log also, maybe it will be useful for your company, depending.
In a lot of organizations these days, the log is becoming even more important. And so a lot of Jabber clients and other IM clients now can be completely searchable. And what tends to happen is we just store the information, and then if we ever need to go back to it, we've got a record of it. So there are communication tools that will help out here, but what we're really trying to do is find various different communication patterns that will allow us to keep that communication going as easily and as quickly as possible.
And also regarding communication, you need to think first before joining a distributed project that probably you need to do some investment first. If you're a small company, you can't just think, oh, I got a computer, network access, Skype, let's go and do distributed outsource. You need to really invest in an infrastructure, communication infrastructure, network infrastructure. You'll need secure networks, fast networks. If you want to access resources all over the world, you can't just go to a remote terminal, type a word, a letter, and just wait for 5 minutes till you see it on the screen. You really need a good infrastructure, good phones with good speakers. You need to be able to maybe sometimes, pick up the phone, make a call to the United States, Europe, wherever else, and just be able to do it and take the conversation as many times as it needs. And that's also something that needs more money, and managers and business needs to understand that.
What we're finding now in a lot of the American outsourcing, particularly to Eastern Europe, is that what we take for granted in the way we do business in America isn't necessarily taken for granted in other parts of the world. One is the cell phone. We use our personal cell phones or our work cell phones in America for both purposes. We carry one phone, one handset. And it's common for the company to pay for our service because they know we are now always instantly reachable. In Eastern Europe in particular, most people have cell phones, but it's their cell phone. And they don't do a lot of international calling, so they don't have the capacity or the capability of necessarily doing international calling with that phone. And so when we have in America, if we're not going to make a stand up, we'll dial in. Not a problem. Wherever we are, we're on the train, we're in the subway, we're in a restaurant, we'll dial in. We rarely think about being in the right place at the right time. America's all about convenience, so wherever we are, that's where the meeting is. How many of you have ever heard the espresso machine at Starbucks in your stand-ups? A lot of times it's in the background. But what I find in Eastern Europe is that both the mobile, people have the mobiles, but they're not able to call in. They don't think about calling in because it's not their personal phone, it's not their work phone. So if we have a stand-up in the middle of the night, rather than saying, just dial in from home, don't worry about it, they will come into the office. They'll do the stand-up, 15 minutes, and then they'll go home. That's a lot of travel for a meeting that probably should be reorganized. And so when we talk about communication patterns, what we want to do is make sure that we incorporate our remote team members and we understand what they're doing and how they're doing it, both in terms of technology and in terms of the personal communication eddies that they have. So those are the types of things that we need to make sure that we're cognizant of if we want distributed Agile to work. So then we have the last line here, what about the core XP practices? So it goes back to this tailored map of practices. What we see is that there's a bunch of different boxes here, and we'll kind of point to some of these very quickly, that are either harder or less hard in order to implement in a distributed way. Coding standards in a distributed environment are really mandatory. If you can't expect that the code that the Indian sub-team is working is going to have the same format and the same look and feel as the one that the Thais are working on, and the ones that the Canadians are working on as the ones that you're working on, then it's going to take you a lot of extra time to go back through this and figure out just what these modules do. So if everybody works with the same coding standard, it's a lot easier to go to collective code ownership. It's a lot easier to maintain a simple design. So those are the types of things that we recommend focusing on. There's one here in the middle though, pair programming. How many of you guys pair program? Or have ever pair programmed? Quite a few. How many of you have done a remote pair programming? A couple.
How did you do it? Remote pair programming, sorry. How have you done it?
Yes, by VXH.
Remote desktop.
Yeah.
Great idea.
It's a pretty common one.
You could do nowadays, for example, in NetBeans, you have a collaboration environment when everybody can touch the same code. You have some facility on IAM embedded on the tool. So, you know, it's really a nice tool for it.
Right, and there's a lot of different, again, there's a lot of technology that's out there. Do we have anybody from Sabre here? You guys do pair programming, I know in the Krakow office. Have you done any of that here? Remote pair programming? Okay.
What?
There-
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, what if we can't do pair programming, remote pair programming, because we don't have the tools? What else? Can we do something else?
Get the tools. Reviews, code reviews.
Code reviews, yeah. In the open source world, they don't do pair programming, as far as I know, but they do have strict code reviews.
We did outsource for it. So reviews is a very interesting point of view, because when we look at pair programming, the way I like to explain pair programming, mostly to senior management, because they just don't get it. But back in the dawn of time, we wrote code as individual code jockeys, and a lot of times there were bugs. And so this concept was invented called code reviews. And we would write a bunch of code, and then we would review it with our peers and find a whole bunch of the code. And as we wrote more and more code, because we did higher and higher level languages, we would come to these code reviews with literally books of the stuff that we had written. We would be very, very proud of it. And we'd ask people to review it, and you'd invariably get 90% of the people in the code review to start from the beginning and read through, and after the first couple of pages they'd lose interest and they'd start just looking for typos or semicolons, and nobody would ever check the bottom part. And so, you know, it got to the point where you would find somebody and say, why don't you check from the back? And there'd always be usually one person who would read from the back. And so all you'd really be missing is a code review of the middle. And then IBM came up with this concept of a code inspection, which is a slightly different take on it. And they did it because the inherent idea behind a code review is extremely valuable. So what they wanted to do is try to get as much of the code reviewed as possible. So the idea was you start with a much smaller book, and instead of standing up in front of you and reviewing it with all you people who should have read through it, I give it to a little chunk of it to each of a small group of people, and it's their responsibility to read it and present back to me, the code owner. And then if they can't explain it to me, then it probably didn't make sense or good enough sense, and it kind of points to this collective code ownership as well. So what you would end up with in a code inspection is a much more complete review of the code. Now we have pair programming. Pair programming, if you think about it, is 100% inspection of the code at all times by by at least one other set of eyes. We usually don't treble program, it's usually pair program. And in many cases, particularly with people who have a shared system metaphor and you're following simple design and you've got a consistent coding standard, regardless of whether you've got a senior and a junior person or people who haven't necessarily worked in the same areas of the code before, a code or a pair programming between any two people on a program can usually cover and find almost all of the defects. It is the best way to improve the quality of a product. So if you can't pair a program because of your distributedness, there are other ways, whether it's a review or an inspection, but what you want to do is make sure you have another set of eyes on the code at all times. So looking at some of these other practices, the things that you may have to modify as far as going through is, there's one down here in the bottom that you no doubt can't read, which says sustainable
I like that
pace.
one. What happened with sustainable pace? If you outsource, you contract a team in India, should you care about sustainable pace? Aren't they second-class workers? What do you think about it? Are we in Argentina? Do you think when they outsource here, do they care for us? Do you see us as second-class workers, first-class level workers? I think it's pretty important to make a big point on sustainable pace because there's, at least what I believe is there are no second-class level workers, neither us, neither people in India or any other country. And we need to make that clear for everyone. Make everyone that we all work on the same pace, on the same hours. Everyone has their own holidays, their own culture, their own lunchtime, their own after hours. And we need to respect that and respect the people. And that's an important practice for that.
The slides will be available. The point is, and the major point really, is that everybody works best in their circadian rhythm. The circadian rhythm, in case you don't know the word, is your normal waking times. So a lot of times, particularly in the early days of outsourcing, we Americans, because the world revolves around us, we would look at everybody else and they are supposed to work when we work. So when I pick up the phone at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I want to be able to get a hold of my developers wherever they are and ask them a question. So if they happen to be in Bangalore, I expect them to answer the phone. And in the early days of software outsourcing, they did.
Maybe today also.
Well, because what they ended up doing is shifting their day to effectively suit their masters. And what ends up happening is people work outside their circadian rhythm, and what happens when you work outside your circadian rhythm? Do you make more or less defects? And so,
Sorry, yeah.
Actually, there are companies right now in India that are offering 3 shifts to adapt to that situation.
they are. And do you think that third shift of software development is going to be as good as the first shift?
Maybe. Nurses,
Maybe.
nurses do it.
It becomes at least a question. There are certainly a lot of people out there in the world these days who are night owls, who are nocturnal, and work better then. And that's fine. That becomes their natural circadian rhythm. But what tends to happen in all parts of the world is we assume that all you guys, you live in India, you're going to work at night. What you need to do is you need to interview for that. You want to work at night? You work better at night? I want to see your code? Great, that's fine. You don't want to work at night? Okay, that's fine. So if we're going to have 3 shifts, we need to make sure that the people in those shifts are the right people. So we have the right people doing the right things at the right time, and it feels comfortable to them. It's great if you can do that. But one of the ideas